Welcome back to The Cognitive Performer. My name is Marco Rigazio, and I am so excited about today's episode because I'm doing it a little different today. Instead of diving deep into one specific topic, I'm answering questions that came in from some of my fellow voice actors. I put out a call asking what you wanted to know about the brain and performance, and man, did you guys come through. I got some fantastic questions that really show how curious our community is about the science behind what we do. So today's episode is all about you, your questions, your curiosity, and hopefully I'll have some answers that'll be useful for you, your work, and your life. As always, I'm backing up everything I share with recent research, usually within the last 5 years, because I want to make sure we're getting the most current understanding of how our brains work. And don't worry, I'll keep it conversational and practical, just like we're having coffee and talking about this stuff. So let's jump right in and start answering your questions. Okay, time for our first question.
Hey, Marco. Love your podcast. This is Norm Izard at vocalnorm.com. I'm curious about why people see the world so differently. Some folks are super analytical, tackling math problems or organizing thoughts with crystal clear precision. Others seem to see things more chaotically, approaching problems in a scattered way without a clear pattern. What drives these differences in how we process and perceive things? Also, what's the deal with dreams? Why do we have them?
Thanks for sending in the question, Norm, and thank you for the kind words about the podcast. Now, these are both fantastic questions, so let me tackle them one at a time. First, your question about why people see the world so differently. Well, this is really fundamental stuff about how our brains are wired. These aren't just personality differences. They're actual differences in how your brain processes and organizes information coming in from the world. Recent research from 2021 shows that people literally see and process visual information differently. Some brains are really good at what's called sequential processing, breaking things down into component parts and analyzing them step by step. These are people who can look at a complex math problem and systematically work through it piece by piece with that crystal clear precision you mentioned. But other brains, they're more oriented to holistic processing. They're better at seeing patterns, connections, and the big picture all at once. When these people approach problems, it might look chaotic or scattered from the outside, but their brains are actually making connections across different domains and looking for patterns that aren't immediately obvious. And here's what's really fascinating. Those differences show up in actual brain structure and function. The analytical sequential processors tend to show more activity in the left hemisphere and in areas associated with systematic, logical processing. But the holistic pattern recognition people show different activation patterns entirely. More right hemisphere involvement, stronger connections between different brain regions. There's also fascinating research from 2025 that looked at thousands of researchers and found that people with different cognitive traits are literally drawn to different types of problems. People with higher cognitive structure, those who prefer systematic, logical approaches, tend to see the world very differently than people who are more comfortable with ambiguity and complex pattern recognition. But here's the thing that's really important to understand. Neither way of processing is better or worse. They're just different tools for different types of problems. The analytical, systematic people are incredible at catching details, maintaining consistency, following logical sequences, and solving problems that have clear step-by-step solutions. The more scattered, pattern-seeking people, they're better at seeing unexpected connections, adapting to new situations, coming up with novel solutions, and spotting patterns that others just might miss entirely. What looks like chaos from the outside is often a brain that's processing multiple variables and possibly simultaneously. Recent research also shows that these processing differences might start very early in brain development. Some people's brains they develop stronger connections with different regions, making them really good at focused, detailed analysis. Others develop strong connections between different regions, making them better at seeing how everything connects and relates. Now, as for your dreams question, this is actually one of the most fascinating areas in neuroscience right now, and we've learned so much in just the past few years. So what's actually happening in your brain when you dream? There's this incredible 2025 study that used machine learning to actually classify when people were dreaming versus having dreamless sleep just by looking at their brain waves. What they found is that when you're dreaming, specific patterns of electrical activity light up across your brain. It's like your neurons are having this complex conversation that we can actually detect and measure. Most of your vivid dreams happen during what's called REM sleep. That's rapid eye movement sleep. During REM, your brain is almost as active as when you're awake, but your body is essentially paralyzed. That paralysis is actually protective. It keeps you from acting out your dreams and potentially hurting yourself or your partner next to you. Now, I've heard people describe dreams as your subconscious leaking into your conscious mind. And there's actually some real truth to that. Here's what's happening. During your dreams, your prefrontal cortex, which is like your brain's CEO that normally keeps things organized, logical, and filtered, becomes much less active. Meanwhile, areas like your limbic system, which deal with emotions and deeper memories, become more active. So in a way, the usual filtering that happens when you're awake gets relaxed. Content that's normally operating below our conscious level, old memories, unresolved emotions, random associations, etc., can subtly bubble up and become part of your dream experience. Okay, that's all well and good, but why do we have dreams at all? Well, the latest research suggests that dreams serve multiple important functions. First, they're like your brain's filing system. A 2024 study found that we're especially likely to dream about recent experiences that connect with things we already know well. Your brain is literally taking new information, figuring it out, where to put it, and mixes it with your existing knowledge. Second, dreams seem to be your brain's way of emotional processing. Research from 2020 shows that during REM sleep, your brain is working through emotional experiences, especially stressful or significant ones. It's like your brain is running therapy sessions with itself while you sleep. And third, dreams might be helping with problem solving and creativity. Your brain makes connections during dreams that it might not make while you're awake and focused. That's why you sometimes wake up with solutions to problems you were struggling with. So to answer your question directly, we have dreams because they're an essential part of how our brains maintain itself, process experiences, and give us access to mental content that's usually hidden from our waking consciousness. They're not just random weirdness. They're your brain doing some serious overnight maintenance work. Thanks for the question, Norm. Okay, now time for question number 2.
Hi, Marco. It's Monique Mosher. And one of my questions for you is, how about dreaming? Why do we dream? And how does our brain work while dreaming? When we were in one of our accountability groups, afterwards we sat and chatted about manifestation. And I was just wondering why negative thoughts attract negativity and vice versa. Why positive thoughts attract positivity? One last question. What about aging and the brain? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Hi, Monique. Great to hear from you, and thanks for these great questions. So, since I covered your dreams question pretty thoroughly before when I answered Norm's question, let me jump to your other 2 questions, if that's okay. You mentioned that conversation we had about manifestation after one of our accountability meetings, and you asked why negative thoughts attract negativity while positive thoughts attract positivity. So there's actually solid neuroscience behind this, and it's way more interesting than just think positive thoughts. Our brains have what researchers call a negativity bias. A 2020 study shows our brains are literally wired to pay more attention to negative information than positive. Using brain scans, researchers found that negative images triggered much stronger responses than positive ones. This evolved because paying attention to threats was crucial for survival. The ancestors, our ancestors, who were good at spotting danger, were the ones who survived. But here's where the attraction part comes in. It's not mystical. It's your brain's filtering system. A big part involves the reticular activating system, or RAS, which acts like a filter for information. You know how when you buy a new car, you suddenly see that model everywhere? Well, those cars were always there, but your RAS didn't think they were relevant until you bought one. The same thing happens with thinking patterns. When you're in negative thinking patterns, your RAS flags more negative information as important and lets it through to your conscious awareness. A 2024 study found biological evidence for this. People who think positively showed completely different brain patterns than negative thinkers, with more activity in areas that are associated with cognitive control and emotional regulation. And here's the crucial part. Your thinking patterns literally change your brain structure over time. Research from 2020 found that repetitive negative thinking is linked to physical brain changes, while positive thinking practices actually rewire your brain. The neurons that fire together wire together thing, remember that? So the more you practice positive thinking patterns, the stronger those neural pathways become. So it's not that your thoughts magically attract experiences. It's that your brain gets better at noticing and interpreting information in ways that match your dominant thinking patterns. Now, your question about aging in the brain. This is really important because the research shows it's way more complex than just everything gets worse. Yes, our brains do change as we age. A 2025 study found that different brain cells age differently, and there's brain atrophy where your brain shrinks about 5% per decade after 40. That doesn't sound great. But here's the fascinating part. Your brain doesn't just passively deteriorate. A 2022 study found that aging brains become more integrated. When we're younger and do complex tasks, our brains use specific regions. But as we age, our brains recruit more areas to help with the same tasks. This is called compensation. Your brain develops new strategies to maintain performance even when other areas aren't as sharp. There's also research from 2020 showing that certain mental activities build cognitive reserve, basically a buffer against aging effects. People who stay mentally active, learn new skills, or work with complex information throughout their lives show much better preservation of cognitive function. And here's something surprising. Aging isn't just about decline. Recent research shows older brains actually get better at some things. Seeing the big picture, emotional regulation, and accessing accumulated wisdom. The key insight is that aging isn't a one-way slide toward decline. Your brain is constantly adapting and compensating. The people who age most successfully understand this and actively engage in activities that support their brain's natural adaptive abilities. Okay, time for the last set of questions.
Hey, Marco. So glad you're taking questions. So where does creativity come from? Do we even know? And you know that feeling where you come up with a really good idea that really just connects all the dots and it feels like your whole brain is really kicking ass? What is that? And here's another question. How does exercise affect the brain? Can't wait to hear your answers.
All right, let's dive into these fantastic questions from Erin Cox. So Erin, you asked where creativity comes from and whether we even know. Well, Erin, I've got some really exciting recent research to share with you on this one. For the longest time, creativity was this mysterious thing that nobody could really pin down scientifically. We had this vague idea about right-brain creativity, but that was pretty much it. But in 2024, researchers at the University of Utah and Baylor College of Medicine published some absolutely groundbreaking research that actually identified where creative ideas originate in the brain. And get this, they used some incredibly precise brain monitoring techniques. They actually had electrodes implanted in people's brains who they were already having brain surgery for medical reasons, so they could watch creativity happen in real time, down to the millisecond. What they found was amazing. It turns out that creative ideas start in something called the default mode network, or DMN. This is the network that's active when you're daydreaming, letting your mind wander, or just spacing out. The researchers described it as maintaining your spontaneous stream of consciousness. So it's basically the network that's running when you're not focused on any specific task. But here's the really cool part. When people were asked to come up with creative uses for everyday objects like a chair or a cup, the DMN lit up first. Then, its activity synchronized with other brain regions involved in problem solving and decision making. So creativity isn't just random mind wandering, it's this coordinated dance between your wandering mind and your analytical brain. And here's the kicker. When the researchers temporarily dampened activity in parts of the DMN, people came up with significantly less creative ideas. But the other brain functions, like regular mind wandering, stayed completely normal. This proves that the DMN isn't just associated with creativity, it's actually required for it. Now, your second question about that amazing feeling when you come up with a really good idea that connects all the dots and your whole brain feels like it's kicking ass. Oh man, Erin, you're talking about one of my favorite topics in neuroscience. That feeling has a name, and researchers call it the insight moment or Eureka experience, and we're actually starting to understand the brain chemistry behind it. When you have one of those breakthrough moments, several things are happening in your brain simultaneously. First, there's a massive surge of dopamine. That's your brain's reward chemical. It's the same neurotransmitter that gets released when you eat something delicious or hear your favorite song. But insight moments can trigger an even bigger release. But it's not just dopamine. Recent research from 2024 shows that insight moments also involve something called gamma wave activity. These are really high-frequency brain waves that happen when different parts of your brain are communicating super efficiently. It's like your whole brain suddenly gets on the same wavelength and starts working in perfect sync. There's also this moment where activity in your anterior cingulate cortex spikes. Sorry about that, little sciencey stuff again. This is an area that's involved in detecting conflicts and breakthroughs. It's literally the part of your brain that goes, aha, something important just happened here. It's like your brain's internal alarm system, but for good things instead of threats. And here's what makes it feel so incredibly good. Your brain releases a cocktail of chemicals like endorphins, which are natural painkillers that create feelings of euphoria, and small amounts of norepinephrine, which is related to excitement and arousal. So you get this combination of reward, excitement, and this feeling that everything just clicked into place. Now, what's really interesting is that this brain state is different from regular problem solving. When you're working through a problem step by step, you're using your analytical networks. But insight moments happen when your default mode network, that same creativity network we just talked about, suddenly makes a connection that your conscious mind hadn't considered. The reason it feels so good is because your brain is essentially rewarding itself for making a breakthrough. Evolution selected for brains that feel amazing when they solve problems or make important connections, because those moments of insight often led to survival advantages. So that rush you feel, that's millions of years of evolution telling you, great job, keep doing that. Okay, that was corny. Sorry about that. Anyway, and finally, your question about how exercise affects the brain. This is one area where research is just incredibly consistent and exciting. Here's the short answer. Exercise is basically like fertilizer for your brain. I'm not even exaggerating. There's research from 2023 that looked at over 10,000 people's brain scans and found that those who regularly exercised had larger brain volumes in areas crucial for memory and learning. We're talking about the gray matter that processes information, the white matter that connects brain regions, and especially the hippocampus, which is essential for forming new memories. But it gets even more exciting. Exercise actually triggers the creation of new brain cells, a process called neurogenesis. This happens primarily in the hippocampus and is driven by something called the BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Again, sorry about that. Think of the BDNF as fertilizer for your brain. Exercise causes your brain to release more of it, which helps existing neurons stay healthy and encourages the growth of new ones. Here's what's really remarkable. Recent research from 2025 shows that even moderate exercise, we're talking about fewer than 4,000 steps a day, can have positive effects on brain health. That's way less than the often suggested 10,000 steps, so it's totally achievable for most people. Now, different types of exercise seem to have different effects on the brain, which is fascinating. Aerobic exercise like running or swimming is particularly good for neurogenesis and memory formation. But resistance training improves executive functions like planning and decision making. And activities like dance that combine physical movements with complex mental processing can enhance cognitive flexibility and even creativity. Exercise also fundamentally changes how your brain manages stress. It increases levels of norepinephrine and endorphins, which help your brain cope with stressful situations more effectively. And it improves sleep quality, which is crucial because that's when your brain consolidates memories and clears out metabolic waste. But here's something that might surprise you. Exercise doesn't just make you feel better, it actually makes your brain more resilient to damage and aging. Recent research shows that people who exercise regularly have what's called greater cognitive reserve. Their brains are better able to maintain function even when faced with injury or age-related changes. The bottom line is that exercise isn't just good for your body, it's one of the most powerful tools you have for optimizing brain function. It increases brain volume, promotes the growth of new neurons, improves cognitive performance, enhances stress resilience, and protects against age-related decline. The really amazing thing is that you don't need to become a marathon runner to get these benefits. Thank God, because I am not a runner. So even modest amounts of regular physical activity can have profound effects on how your brain works and how well it ages. Wow, what a range of questions. I hope this was helpful and gave you some new insights into how your brain works. What I love about all these questions is how they show that understanding your brain isn't just academic knowledge. It's practical information that can help you understand yourself better. A few key takeaways from today. Dreams aren't just weird nighttime movies. They're your brain processing emotion and memories while giving you access to thoughts that are usually below the conscious awareness. Your thinking patterns literally reshape your brain, so being intentional about them actually matters. Aging brains don't just decline, they adapt and compensate in sophisticated ways. People think differently because their brains are actually wired differently, and that's a feature, not a bug. Creativity comes from a specific brain network that specializes in making unexpected connections. Those amazing aha moments have real brain chemistry behind them, and exercise might be the single best thing you could do for your brain health. Thanks so much to Monique, Norm, and Erin for these fantastic questions. If you have questions you'd like me to tackle in a future episode, please send them my way. I love hearing from you, and it really helps me to create content that answers the things you're actually curious about. You can send a voice recording to marco@thecognitiveperformer.com. Okay, next month I'll be back with a full deep dive episode on a topic we haven't covered yet. Until then, take care of those amazing brains of yours. Thanks for listening to The Cognitive Performer. I'll catch you next time.